What's up, everybody? This is episode 104 of Hoops Talk with Dave's Joint. Shout outs to everybody that's been supporting us thus far. For those who haven't seen any of our episodes, go check us out on YouTube, Facebook, and IGTV. But before we start, we want to give a shout out to our sponsors, the Players Circle. They're an interactive app for basketball. If you want to throw some videos on there, some pictures, and if you want to buy some merch, go check out the app on the App Store. It's the Players Circle. But without further ado, we have a very, very special guest this evening. Well, out there, it's still the afternoon, but he's one of the game changers in grassroots basketball. For those of you that know him, he is the founder of the Pangos All American Camp, which is a non sponsored entity that has produced plenty of the best for the last 20 some odd years and counting. And he also operated the Dream Classic back in the early 2000s. He had players such as LeBron James, Sebastian Telfair, and so on and so on. And he also coached the Belmont Shore program, which had Brandon Jennings and DeMar DeRozan, two NBA players on there. But without further ado, I give you Mr. Dinos Trigonis. Dinos, thank you for coming on to share your
Hey, thank you
story.
for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity. And I'm aware of your sponsor, the Players Circle. And Corey does a fantastic job with that. And it's a great resource for young players out there to
Yes,
use and utilize for their exposure and recruiting.
indeed. So let's get started. So you're a coach. What's Dinos Trigonis' coaching philosophy?
My coaching philosophy is not to overcoach. That's number one. And obviously, coaching grassroots versus coaching high school, most often, not in all cases, but most often is a different environment. In a high school situation, you normally have a high school gym or a gym on campus or connected with the high school that you have access to on a regular basis. And you're in there maybe 5 days a week, 6, 7 days a week, whatever the state rules are in that area. And the AAU situation, now there are some AAU teams that do a good job and have facilities, but very few. I believe the New York Gauchos have their own facility. I know there's some other teams that have either their own facilities or access to facilities on a regular basis. But that's typically the exception rather than the rule. I think most teams don't have access to a regular facility, and they don't have a team personnel that all are within the same radius. A lot of teams have guys who are an hour away, 2 hours away, maybe even 4 hours away in a different state. And it's almost like you have to coach differently. You have to kind of emphasize the fundamentals, good basketball versus trying to be too elaborate or too intricate on what scheme you're trying to do. And for the most part, on an AAU's high level AAU, you're normally getting high level guys who can play. And I think it's more important, I think more beneficial to the team and to the players' development that you allow them to make plays rather than trying to manufacture. Because a lot of high school situations, you may only have one guy that can make a shot, or you may have no guys that can make their own shot, and you have to create systems or schemes to manufacture points after 3, 4, 5 passes, 2 or 3 screens, things of that nature. So it's a different scenario. I think the mistake sometimes AAU coaches make is trying to do too much, knowing that they don't have a lot of time to implement. And sometimes that can be confusing to the players and not produce a desired result. Because in order to have a sophisticated system, you need more time to implement that system and more, gym time and experience in games, which doesn't always exist at the AAU level. When you're playing maybe weekend to weekend, you might be able to squeeze one practice in. Very often when you have a practice, not all your team players are there for various reasons. maybe they can't make it because of proximity. Maybe they have an issue with the test the next day, and their mom doesn't want them to go to practice. They want them to study. So you have different variables you got to balance. So it's a little more complicated, but I think the fundamentals are the same. And I remember talking to Coach Dana Altman from Oregon one time, and fundamentals of basketball are whether it's 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever the personnel is the better talent you have, the more possessions you want to have. The less talent you have, the less possessions. Basically saying you have players, let them play, let them push the rock, let them get shots up. If you don't have the talent and you're trying to win and you're playing a better team, it's in your interest to have less possessions, to keep the gap narrower. You got a better chance to win. That's why you've seen a coach like Dick Bennett, Tony's dad, who at Wisconsin and Washington State did a tremendous job. I think he went to a Final Four one time at Wisconsin, but he wasn't getting the players Ohio State was getting or Michigan. And he had to be a little more deliberate in his play because he knew he could win games in the 40s or 50s, but he couldn't win games in the 70s. So it became his offense was probably as good a defense as it was an offense. So you have different ways of winning in basketball, but Dave Miller, who used to run the skills at my Pangos All-American camp, loves to say, players change, times change, the fundamentals never change. So whether you're playing back in the 80s, 90s, or even now, good basketball is good basketball. The pick and roll has been around for decades. Most of what we take for granted is not anything new. It's been there. It's a matter of executing simple, basic stuff.
Well said. So let's start from the very beginning. When did basketball first begin for you?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually played. I was one of the first of three brothers to play at my high school in Wilson High School, Woodrow Wilson High School in Long Beach, California. We're kind of crosstown rivals to a better known school named Long Beach Poly. You may have heard about. It's had a lot of success both in the NBA, actually NFL as well. A lot of NFL players have come through Poly, and my two younger brothers played as well. I was fortunate to play on a good team. One of my teammates was good enough to go to Northwestern and start there as a senior in the Big Ten. Don Broach is now still living in Chicago. Another teammate, Darren Rector, was recruited by San Jose State. I also had a teammate that was a D1 football quarterback with the UCLA, Bobby San Jose. So we had some good talent, but most of all, my coach had a pretty good pedigree. He played for Lute Olson in junior college, and he played for Jim Killingsworth at TCU, and he was on the all back then. I think it was called the Southwestern Conference. He was on the first team with Alvin Adams, who was a great NBA player. So the coaching lineage, learning from him, a lot of what we did was Lute Olson stuff, and the stuff that I remember was it was very basic, very fundamental, and it was very routine. It wasn't too fancy. Everything was basic. It was easy to comprehend and easy to execute. So I think a large part of that came from his experience with Lute Olson. So I'm kind of part of the Lute Olson coaching tree leaf, so to speak, because he played with another guy there at Long Beach City College named Gary Anderson, who would later become the head coach at Long Beach City College. And Gary's son, Ricky Anderson, played at Arizona on that team that made the final with Gilbert Arenas, Lauren Woods, Luke Walton, Richard Jefferson. So it's kind of an intermingling of Lute actually was in Long Beach for both junior college and 1 year at Long Beach State. Because actually one time we were fortunate enough to have in the city of Long Beach, both at the D1 level and junior college level, which back then was a pretty big deal, both Jerry Tarkanian and Lute Olson coaching within 5 miles of each other, 3 miles of each other at the same time. And actually Lute replaced Jerry for 1 year at Long Beach State, his first D1 job. he went, think 24-2, but they were on probation and weren't eligible for the tournament. And then he went to Iowa and he came back to Arizona after that. So I'm kind of fortunate enough to be exposed to that. I graduated from Long Beach State, didn't play there, went there for school. I was able to meet some guys that are on the team there. Seth Greenberg had just got there as an assistant and became the head coach. So I met Seth Greenberg, who's now at ESPN, way back then. And then I was also friends with Tony Ronzoni, who played at Long Beach State, who's now in the Dallas Mavericks front office. Has been in the NBA for several years. Friends with him. And then when I went to Temple Law School in Philadelphia, when I came back, I started coaching and running events at the tail end of my youngest brother's high school career. And things kind of mushroomed from that point, because there were some people here locally that were doing big things, like the late Izzy Washington, who ran the Slam and Jam for many years. It was a premier tournament in the country that drew national teams. Rich Goldberg ran the ARC. Those guys were kind of like the pioneers of grassroots in this area. But there were actually back then a lot less teams, and the calendar was a lot less congested than it is now. So there was room for other activities, and for people like myself and guys like Atop Udoema, who's now with Compton, who's been with Compton Magic. We've been running stuff together for 20 plus years. There was room for guys like us. We were young at the time. We were in our late 20s at that point. Then for us to have new concepts. Back then also was the beginning of the live period in September. So Izzy and Goldberg would do things in the summer, and Izzy would have his famed Slam and Jam League in the spring, but he really didn't think much about the fall. So when the fall became open, it was an opportunity, which I did my first ever tournament called the Long Beach Fall Hoops Classic at Long Beach City College. And believe it or not, the first one we had, one of the players at that time was a young sophomore at that time in high school. Paul Pierce played in it, the very first event, as a high school sophomore. So that's it kind of dates me kind of back a little further than I like, but it kind of it kind of grew up from there. In that tournament, for about 7 years or so, they had the 7 to 8 years. I forgot exactly when they had that window open. Was one of the premier tournaments in the West, and we used to get teams from as far east as Texas come down there. Rashard Lewis one time was the MVP. He came down with Houston Hoops when Josh Pastner was still a graduate student or a walk-on at Arizona. He coached his dad's team in my tournament back then around 1998, 99, in that time frame. So we had some great games, a lot of good players come through that. And in the Dream Classic that you alluded to, that originally started also in 1995 under the Martin Luther King Holiday Classic. But because a lot of people didn't realize, a lot of people use the MLK name and they don't realize the legal impact. If you use the word holiday with it, you're probably okay with it legally. But if you put MLK Classic, you're setting yourself up for liability if the family wants to come after you. And, it's an inappropriate use of their trademark.
Right.
And you have to get, from a legal standpoint, get permission. People don't understand that. And most of the time, most people are below the radar. It doesn't register. It doesn't come to their attention. But because in the late 90s, that event was eventually sponsored by Nike. And obviously with Nike on board, it was a much bigger potential liability. We changed the name to Dream Classic to avoid that problem. And I was hosting it with Dominguez High School's program at that time. And before the game that LeBron played in, which is it's very well known for, we had some great games in the late 90s. 2 years back to back were Compton Dominguez played LA Crenshaw at UCLA's Pauley Pavilion, and we drew 7,500 one year and 8,500 the next. So and then that kind of led up to to the LeBron James game in 2003. It's kind of funny about that particular game. It was a triple header, and little did we know that in that same game that LeBron was in, you had Aaron Aflalo, who was emerging as a junior, who would become a double-digit year NBA player and first-round pick out of UCLA. I think he went to two or three Final Fours at UCLA as well. And now LeBron's technical agent now, who heads the basketball division of Clutch, was also a player in that game. Omar Wilkes played in that game. So it comes full circle in many ways. And Omar, as you probably know, is the son of Laker great Jamal Wilkes, who played at UCLA. And Omar did a great job for Octagon for many years and signed Trae Young and Cam Reddish for Octagon. And now I think he had Anthony Davis this year, but he got hired by Clutch to run their basketball. Well, yeah, with Anthony Edwards this year. He had the number one pick this year. Yeah. So Omar is a rising star. He'd been a rising star in that business. And Omar had played basketball at Kansas and Cal, finished up at Cal. His brother, Jordan Wilkes, who also played at Cal, is now with the Hornets as a scout for Mitch Kupchak, Jordan Wilkes. But I think what ultimately ended up about a year ago, if you remember, a mega entertainment agency, representation agency, UTA, bought Clutch and hired Rich Paul to keep him on board to run their sports business, which under the same brand of Clutch. And I think they are going after multiple sports now, which gave him a lot more responsibility than just basketball. So it's my understanding that they brought Omar in to kind of do the full-time basketball, weekly day-to-day thing, and free up Rich to do more sports and take a bigger role within the parent company, because now Clutch, as you may have heard or not heard, is part of UTA, which is similar to CAA.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, UTA is CAA's biggest competitor from the Hollywood motion pictures entertainment side of the business.
That's cool. So talk about growing up in Long Beach, California.
Yeah, Long Beach, California is kind of it's an interesting place. We're on the water here. We're kind of a blend between urban and suburban. It's kind of like a hybrid. We're not purely urban and we're not purely suburban. We're it's kind of a hybrid, kind of a mixture of two. We have a really nice downtown. We have some nice neighborhoods, distinct neighborhoods and shopping districts. We have a lot of diversity. Even when I grew up, the schools were very diverse, races, ethnicities, religions. When I went to high school, we had just got an influx of Asians from the Vietnam, Southeast Asian conflict, people who had escaped that era in those countries. So there was a lot of Cambodians, Vietnamese. There's a part of Long Beach that's Cambodia town. There's about 30 or 40,000 Cambodians living in Long Beach, if not more by now. So it was a very, very diverse city, and it's kind of a reflection of America in that it has pretty much everything you'd find in any part of America, whether it's white, black, Hispanic, Asian, Jewish, families, young professionals. We have the university in town here, which is about 35,000 students strong, Long Beach State. You have a junior college. You have some golf courses. You have some urban areas. Yeah. And you have it's kind of a good mix. And you're kind of centrally located in Southern California too, because we're about 2 minutes from, depending where you're from, to Orange County. Seal Beach, which is the beginning of Orange County, borders us. So you can be, it touches Orange County. You're about 20 minutes from Disneyland. You can get to Huntington Beach, Laguna Beach within minutes. You can get to the LAX airport in 20 minutes. You can get to downtown LA 20, 30 minutes. So we're kind of centrally located also as far as getting to different places or people working here or living here and working elsewhere or vice versa. So it's kind of a growing city. It's been, it was at one time a sailor town years ago during the World Wars. We have a big naval base. We have one of the two biggest harbors in the country, which brings in a lot of the goods and stuff from China and in the Far East. The port of Long Beach is right next to the port of LA, and those two obviously are together the biggest port in the country. So it's kind of a great place to grow up. A lot of things to do, obviously, here in LA. You know, we're close to everything. Vegas is a 4-hour drive. You know, Bay Area is about a 5-6 hour drive. San Diego about 2. Phoenix about 5-6. So we're kind of like kind of situated to get to places. And there's a lot of things to do here to begin with. And the weather obviously is good too, for the most part.
I would definitely move out to Long Beach or at least Southern California.
Yeah.
I could do with the warm weather year round.
Well, Long Beach is, if you're used to urban, Long Beach is good because you're in your element. If you're used to suburban, it's good. So it's kind of there's a mix of both. And you have water, you have further inland, we're close to the mountains. You know, we got some rain here the last week or two. We're 2 hours from snow. I know you got some snow the last couple of days, but we were about if you want snow, you're 2 hours from snow. If you want to get to Vegas for a weekend, it's a 45-minute flight. It's a 4-hour drive. So it's kind of a good place to grow up, to live, and it has a lot of advantages.
Indeed. So you mentioned Woodrow Wilson. You guys have a lot of alumni in there. Let me see. You guys had Gabriel Iglesias, the comedian. You guys
we had the tennis player Billie Jean King.
Wow.
Had her brother played in the Major League Baseball. Bobby Grich, who played for the Angels, with Bob Lemon, who played for the Yankees in the 40s. We had a American League MVP in 1974, Jeff Burroughs from the Rangers, and his son also made the Major League Baseball as well. And we're more well known for aquatic sports, you know, water polo, swimming. Going back to Omar Wilkes's situation, he got married a couple of years ago to a lady from Wilson, who was probably the best volleyball player ever out of the school. She was a U.S. Olympian, played at Stanford. Cynthia Barboza was on the Olympic team. I had a guy on my basketball team, Robert Lynn, who played on the U.S. Olympic water polo team. So we're well known for aquatics. Basketball, we've had a few guys here and there. Michael Batiste, who's now an assistant in the NBA, who went to Arizona State and played, I think, 1 year in the NBA, maybe 20 in Europe. He was one of the highest paid players in Europe. He's from Wilson, and several other guys as well. So it's more known for its aquatics, although we do have some other notable alumni as well.
Shout outs to the Woodrow Wilson Classical High School graduating class of 1985.
Yeah, it wasn't known as classical back then. That's something that was tacked on maybe 10 years ago.
Indeed. So you went to Long Beach State. What talk about, what was it like back in the 80s when you went to school?
Long Beach State, it was very inexpensive. So in fact, I was actually talking to the son of Jerry Tarkanian last night, because when Jerry Tarkanian lived in Long Beach from 1967 to 72, they used to live in Huntington Harbor in Huntington Beach, which was probably about a 10-minute drive from campus. And he always used to tell me, George Tarkanian, that the mistake his dad made when he went to Vegas is that he sold the house, because at that time, all that marina was underdeveloped. It was just starting to be developed. And that property that he probably sold back then for maybe 100,000 might be worth 5 to 10 million now. So,
Wow.
so they wish they probably kept that property there. But Long Beach State also too, for many years, it was very, very affordable. Like in-state tuition back when I went to school, the tuition was probably in the $300 range, 300 to 350 a semester. So now I just looked it up. I just looked it up last night with George. It's up to $5,400 a year now.
Oh, that's
so it was
cheap.
probably it was about $750 a year for tuition. The books obviously were probably a couple $100 each semester.
Wow.
And if you lived at home, you didn't have the housing element. So the good thing, I was within 2 or 3 miles from campus. I lived at home at that time. So to save money, there was no need for me to get an apartment where I lived so close to it. And basically all I had to do was get a parking pass, which was probably $30 a semester, $50 a semester. I forgot what it was back then. But the tuition was very, very cheap. Actually, it was even more cheaper if you went to a junior college. At one time, junior college in California was free up until the 90s. And then it went up to $5 a unit. And those guys started protesting at $5 a unit because they were so used to it being for free. They couldn't comprehend being charged for something. So, because a lot of people, what they would do too, to save a lot of money, and that's why a lot of those people back then probably don't have student loans, is that you could go to junior college and get your, what they call your general education out of the way. All your prerequisites, your general prior to, that's separate from your major, get that out of the way, and then go to a state school like Long Beach State, San Diego State, Fresno State, Cal State Fullerton, and do your 2 years, which would be your major. And you're looking at maybe $2,000 for the whole 4 years, if that, for the tuition back then, plus your books, obviously. So now all that has changed, and it's still very, very affordable considering what the private tuition is.
Oh,
and actually, back I haven't looked, but back when I went to Temple, I went from maybe $750 a year tuition. The 3 years I was at Temple, it was $10,000 my first year, and it was $5,000. I cut it in half in years 2 and 3 because I registered to vote in Pennsylvania. I got my driver's license out there. I got utilities in my name, other things that allowed me to be a resident for the last 2 years, and I was able to save about 10 grand. Instead of paying 30 grand, I ended up paying about 20, which was worth doing all that to get that rate reduced. But back then, the education was a lot less expensive, and now I know a lot of parents are dealing with a lot of issues and obligations and stress trying to pay these college fees and expenses, and it could be quite nerve-wracking, to say the least.
I'm 60 grand in the hole right now, so I can only imagine how everybody feel. But when you were in college, you had it easy at Long Beach State. You know what I'm saying? That's amazing. Like out here, that I don't think that ever would have happened.
Yeah, actually, there were some opportunities for me to play at small schools after my high school career, at smaller schools, maybe out of state. But obviously at that point, at 5'10", 155 pounds at the time, I knew I wasn't going to be invited to the NBA draft combine anytime soon. So I figured I might as well just go somewhere, get my degree, and get that in motion. And even though I still kept tabs on basketball and went to a lot of games at Long Beach State, went to a lot of games at Temple, even before Long Beach State, before I went to school there. I followed the team. I saw Craig Hodges play in college, the great three-point shooter for the Bulls. I actually saw Magic Johnson play in college. Magic Johnson's sophomore year, I believe, he came and played Long Beach State. at the Long Beach Arena. With Tex Winter was the coach for Long Beach at the time. So Tex Winter, as a head coach, coaching against Magic Johnson and Heathcote back then. Also in 1986, when I was going to school there, they had the first and second round of the tournament there that year. And I saw Len Bias's last two games he ever played at the Long Beach Arena. The great Len Bias at Maryland. Saw him, saw Santa Barbara. Pepperdine had a good team with Jim Herrick. I saw Mark Jackson play with St. John's, was there that year. Mark Jackson was there with Walter Berry and Willie Glass. And there might have been, I forgot one other guy there with St. John's. And also Auburn with Chuck Pearson was in that regional. So you had UNLV was in that regional. Arizona with Steve Kerr was in that regional. Arizona, UNLV, Auburn, St. John's, Maryland, Santa Barbara, Pepperdine, and I believe it was Montana State. And those were the 8 teams in that regional that year. So I got a chance to see that I was in my second year of college, and when I was at Temple, I was there when Mark Macon was there, and when the heyday of John Chaney, I was able to see in person their run to the Final 8. I forgot exactly. It might have been 90 or 91, where they lost to North Carolina in the Final 8 in the Meadowlands. But I was there for the first and second rounds and had great tickets in College Park, Maryland, when I think that was a regional with Syracuse and Billy Owens, when they lost the first time a number 2 had lost in the tournament. I saw that game against Richmond, a 2 losing to a 15. You had Temple, you had New Mexico with Luke Longley, NC State with Corsiani and Rodney Monroe. You had Purdue with, I forgot his first name, I think last name is Oliver, who's a hell of a player, and a few other guys there too. So I was able to see that. And also in the Sweet 16 Elite 8 game, you had Temple, North Carolina with Montross, Clifford Rozier, Hubert Davis, Rick Fox. They were loaded. And then you had Oklahoma State, Byron Houston. And then you had Eastern Michigan, which was a kind of a surprise team. Ben Braun, who would later coach at Cal. I think Earl Boykins, the little small guard that made the NBA, was on that team. So I've been lucky enough to see a lot of basketball, maybe too much basketball. And I actually saw a young John Calipari go toe-to-toe with John Chaney at McGonigal Hall in Philadelphia years ago. And John was probably maybe 70 years older than me at that time. And and he was playing with a 6'3" center and a 6-foot point guard that couldn't shoot outside the 5 feet. And he was coaching. Some of his best coaching might have been his early years where he didn't have great talent, to be honest with you, because he actually, Temple had a lot of talent back then, and they were starting to recruit extremely well nationwide. And John Calipari lost in the finals of the Atlantic 10 tournament at Temple that one year by a few points. My memory, if I'm not mistaken, and gave Temple everything they could handle on the road without great players. So some of his better coaching jobs had happened early in his career. It's easy to kind of, when you have Anthony Davis or Jaleel Okafor, Trey Jones, or guy Corey Maggette, Elton Brand to look good, but when you don't have talent, you can still make a run. That shows you how good of a coach you really are.
Mm-hmm. So at Long Beach State, you guys had plenty of famous people come up out of there. Let me read off some of the names. You had Steve Martin. You had Maitland Ward from Boy Meets Girl.
Spielberg. I think Spielberg went to school there.
Spielberg. That's amazing. Spielberg. Steven Spielberg, the director. You guys had Craig Hodges, like you said.
Now, people don't realize when Jerry Tarkanian was at Long Beach, it had just went to Division I. He had come from a very successful junior college career at Riverside and Pasadena City Colleges, junior college. He was at one point, he went 33-0 back-to-back years in junior college, state championships.
That's
And when he got to Long Beach, in 5 years, he was 120-20 Long Beach. And then he went to UNLV with the Final Four at UNLV in '77 with Reggie Theus and another guy named Jackie Robinson, not the Jackie Robinson we all know, but another Jackie Robinson that would have been an NBA player had he not got hurt. But there's a probably as impressive a stat when it comes to coaching that's related to Tarkanian that I've ever seen. When you factor in all the games that Jerry Tarkanian, Long Beach is a town of about 500,000 people. When you add the connecting cities, we're around 600, 700,000. He had a stat during his coaching career as a junior college coach, as the head coach at Long Beach, as the head coach of UNLV, in regular season games, league games, NCAA tournament games, conference tournament games. He was 78-0 while coaching in the city of Long Beach. He never lost a game while coaching in the city of Long Beach. 78-0 over all those years. Not one time did he lose.
Wow. And then you guys in baseball, you guys had Harold Reynolds, the writer and sports analyst, one of my favorite Yankees of all time, Jason Giambi, Evan Longoria,
Yeah.
Troy Tulowitzki from the Blue Jays. In basketball, you guys had George Gervin, the original creator of the finger roll, which
we had him for a minute. You know the story involved with that, right? No. We had him for a minute, but actually he came down to he was recruited out of Michigan to Long Beach State, and they knew he was kind of going to be homesick apparently, so they assigned a student manager to him to make sure he knew whatever he needed. He had any issues, they could attend to it quickly without him getting upset or wanting to go home or whatever. And I think that what my understanding, what story goes, they told the student manager, whatever this guy wants, you do. And I guess he got homesick one time. He wanted to go home, so the guy got him a ticket to go home, and he never came back.
Wow.
But yeah, he was there for a minute. And actually, another great story involves Glenn McDonald, who played there, played with the Boston Celtics in that NBA Finals in the late '70s with the Suns. His son played at Stanford, now lives in the Boston area, Mike McDonald. But Glenn was obviously a very good player, good enough to make the NBA, play in the NBA Finals. I think he's got a ring, I believe, for the Celtics when he was there. But he was initially like a defensive oriented player at the beginning of his career. And he had got tired of being a defensive specialist and wanted to be more of a focal point of Tarkanian's offense. So he came into Tarkanian's office before the season started and said, Coach, I've been doing what you've asked me to do. I played a role. I want to be a much bigger part of the offense. I want to get more shots, whatever. And Tarkanian looked at him and said, hey, you want to be a big part of the offense? Is that what you want? And Glenn said, yeah. He goes, come with me. I want to show you something. I guess Glenn didn't realize that George Irvin had just shown up on campus. And George was working out in the campus gym. So Tarkanian walks him over to the campus gym, the story goes, and says, hey, Glenn, say hello. I want you to watch this guy shoot around for about 10 minutes. He's watching, like you said, the finger rolls and the three-point bombs and the silky smooth mid-range. And Glenn turned to Tarkanian and said, Coach, I'll play defense for you again this year. He said, hey, man, yeah, I'm good. I ain't that good. Got a funny Gervin's story. But most people don't realize Gervin was close to playing there. Raymond Lewis was supposed to go there at one point
Yes,
too.
Raymond Lewis. I heard a
Yeah,
lot of
there's a
stories
new
about him.
new documentary coming out very soon on Raymond Lewis. They were
I'm gonna
having a
definitely
hard
tune
time finding a video of him for some reason.
in.
Because even back then, he ended up going to Cal State LA. Back then, it's kind of a weird deal, and then he got kind of blackballed out of the NBA for refusing to report to training camp. I think what ended up happening, my understanding, he was picked by the Sixers, but he was their second of 2 first-round picks. Doug Collins was the number 1 pick in the draft to Philly, and I think they had another first-round pick in the 20s they used to pick Raymond Lewis. So apparently the story goes, in the training camp, Raymond Lewis, according to him and some sources, may have busted Doug Collins' ass in training camp, or gave him the business, or was his equal, if not better. So apparently Raymond Lewis felt he deserved to be compensated as much as the first round number 1 pick, which is not going to happen, as you know, normally in the draft pecking order, especially not off the bat. And he held out for more money, and he never played, and he got blackballed from the NBA. Back then, it was a smaller league. Probably the other owners saw this guy was, in their minds, being a problem, and they didn't want to mess with him. And that's how sometimes these things go, where guys hold out, and there was probably some kind of loose collusion against him, and he was never able to, for the American public, to know what the people locally in LA had known. So some people, consider him to be arguably the best player ever out of LA in many cases. So that will never be tested or put to any type of barometer because of what happened to his career. And it's just kind of a sad thing, but he was very, very talented in an era where there were no video cameras on every workout or practice, but he was as electric a 6'2" guard, 6'3" or whatever he was. And he was part of that Verdant Day tradition. George McCorn, I believe, coached him back then. George passed away, and George was a longtime coach at Cal State Fullerton as a head coach. He coached Leon Wood, who is now an NBA referee, who was on the Olympic team with Jordan. He was an assistant at UNLV with Tarkanian. He was assistant at Arizona State with Bill Frieder later on. He was the father of Babyface's ex-wife, Tracy
Edmonds,
Edmonds, who's now, I think, married to or involved with Deion Sanders. Tracy was the producer of the famous film Soul Food, if you remember that.
Yeah, I know that
actually,
movie.
Tracy went to high school with me, and her brother, Mike McCorn, didn't play basketball in high school. He was my grade. He played tennis, believe it or not. So his dad was the head coach at Fullerton, and he was playing tennis and not basketball back then.
Wow, that's really cool. And then to sum up, also from Long Beach, you guys had Brian Russell, who Jordan hit the shot over in '98 that everybody already knows. Who else?
Yeah, Brian Russell, I was there when I was there. Lucius Harris, who was an NBA draft pick, played for the Nets for many years. We've had Moreland Wiley, played in the NBA. I went to junior high school with him. He went to Long Beach Poly, and he was also in the Dallas Mavericks organization for a while with Mark Cuban, and he still lives in the Dallas DFW area in Dallas. His brother played in the NBA as well. His brother played for Tex Winter, Michael Wiley, in the 70s, and played for the Spurs. And I went to junior high school with Moreland, who went to also to Long Beach State in the NBA for a few years. And I remember Moreland would always come to school at Jefferson Junior High School with all kinds of nice San Antonio Spurs sweatsuits and all the latest NBA stuff. His brother was in the NBA back then while he was in junior high school.
That's
So
awesome.
Michael Wiley. And we had some, there's probably also the best player in school history, Ed Ratliff from Columbus, Ohio, who was an first team All-American. He was also a first round draft pick, played for the Rockets for 5 years. I think he blew out his knee, but he was famous for being a starter, I believe, on the 1972 Olympic team that lost to the Russians, that controversial call. And that team refused to accept their goal, if you remember the story, refused to accept their silver medals because they had won the game. The referees put time back on the clock again. They replayed the final, whatever seconds it was. The Russians hit a shot, and also they should have won it. And I don't think those guys have ever accepted or received by choice their silver medals. That they refused to accept the silver medal. Doug Collins was on that team. Tom McMillan from Maryland, who became a congressperson, was on that team. Ed Ratliff was on that team, still lives in Long Beach. And Ed was also, speaking of Jerry Tarkanian, on the Tarkanian team in 71 in Salt Lake City that came within 2 points of snapping John Wooden's streak of Final Fours in NCAA titles. I think John Wooden may have won 7 titles in a row. Back in 1971, Ed Ratliff and Jerry Tarkanian lost to them by 2 points in the regional final in Salt Lake City as a top 5 team in the country. And back then, Dave, it was different. No matter where you were ranked, you stayed in your region. Like when Paul Westphal was at USC, they were ranked, third or fourth in the country when UCLA was ranked first. But only back then did the number 1 team get a berth. If you were you could be number 2 in the country. If you were number 2 team in the league, and the number 1 team was the number 1 team in the country, you didn't go to the tournament. You stayed home. So it was a different setup back then. And back-to-back years, Tarkanian lost in the Elite 8 twice in a row to UCLA during that Wooden glory run. And in 1 year, he was within 2 points of snapping that streak. And back then, Long Beach State is known as a commuter campus for the most part. They do have dorms now and all that, but it was even more so back then. And they had been a Division I program for maybe 5 years only. And they were within 2 points of snapping the great John Wooden as a program, 5 years old in the Division I level. So Jerry Tarkanian he had some players, man. He had the Pondexter brothers, obviously Ed Ratliff, McDonald, a lot of other guys that could really play, and was a phenomenal coach. And I was talking to his son the other day, and the one thing I think he doesn't get enough credit for, a lot of coaches have a certain style. Nolan Richardson won with the 40 Minutes of Hell. Petey Carrill won with the Princeton offense. John Chaney had that zone, the famous zone. Mike Krzyzewski does the man-to-man. And he's played some zone recently, but he hates playing zone. Boeheim goes to the zone. But Jerry Tarkanian started out as a zone coach at Long Beach, became a man-to-man at UNLV early on. When he started getting the horses, he became a full court man-to-man team. And then at the end, he combined his full court man-to-man with the amoeba zone, and he blended it together. So he was one of the very few guys that was smart enough to adapt his style to whatever player talent and personnel that he had in order to win. He may be as good as it ever was doing that. Because some guys are known, like Boeheim is going to play a zone no matter what. Whether Hakeem Ward is there, whether Melo's there, whether me or you are there in his backcourt, he's going to play zone.
That's what
it shows you sometimes you have to adapt your style to the personnel you have to maximize, your ability or opportunity to win.
Yeah, man. Shout outs to Isaiah Washington, a native New Yorker who's doing really, really well for Long Beach State right now. averaging 16 points a game.
Yeah, I love it. I say he's an alumni of the Pangos All-American Camp and also the Pangos All-East Frost-Soft Camp, where he had some a great matchup years ago with the great Tremont Waters, who's now with I think the Celtics.
Indeed. Shout outs to the Long Beach State graduating class of 1989 and the Temple Law School graduating class of 1992. Talk about your experience at Temple.
Yeah, Temple was cool. It was actually, I had, like I said, I had grown up in Long Beach. I had went to college nearby. Part of the good thing about Temple was it allowed me to kind of go to a different part of the country. It was as much a life experience as it was an education. I had driven my car out there, so I was able to get around and go to some of the historic sites, whether it's DC, whether it's Valley Forge, which I live not too far away from, Gettysburg, Battlefield. I went there a couple times, enjoyed that. Driving to New York, my sister was living in New York. She still does at the time. Able to go up there quite a bit and experience New York City. Able to get to Atlantic City, the Jersey Shore. I was able to drive to the Basketball Hall of Fame for the first time up there in Springfield, Mass. And one time I was crazy enough with another law school classmate to drive during spring break at 20 hours to Florida for spring break. So it was fun, had to get out there, experience another part of the country, having more of a life experience. Because it was very different, back then, for somebody from Long Beach, we're used to more of a suburban, even though we do have urban, whether in Philly and New York are really urban.
Yeah,
so if you're not used to it, it takes a while to get used to it and get used to all the different customs and traditions of that particular area. Like in Long Beach, California, if we're standing on a red light and waiting to cross, we're going to wait till it turns green, right? In the East Coast, they're not waiting for the green. They're going whenever they get the crack to go. You know what I mean? In Long Beach, where we hear a fire engine, we're pulling over.
Right.
In Philly, you're going to pull over momentarily, and then you're going to jump behind that fire wagon and use it as a blocking back to get to wherever you want to get to.
Exactly.
So the customs are different, and also, the laws are different. I'm not sure now, but back then you had a big Quaker influence. You couldn't buy beer and alcohol at the same place. So I had to learn that the hard way one time because I had just settled in and I had bought a little mini broiler to cook a steak or some meat or whatever. So I was at the ShopRite or whatever, the ShopRite or Super Fresh supermarket, whatever they call it down there in Philly. And I grabbed, get some filet mignon or some steak and whatever it was, and I'm looking for the beer aisle, and I'm strolling down the cart aisle to aisle, and I don't see any beer. I was a little bit confused. I said, "How can a supermarket not have any beer?"
Right.
Turn around. I didn't know. I wasn't from there. I turned to one of the employees and I go, "Excuse me, I'm having a hard time finding your beer. I want to grab a 6-pack."
Right.
A Miller or whatever.
Right.
And he looked at me kind of funny. "We don't sell beer here. You got to get it at the beer store."
Wow.
The guy tells me. So it kind of surprised me a little bit. I was confused. So I'm driving back to my place. I was living at the main line out in Ardmore at that time. And all of a sudden I'm driving down Lancaster Avenue and I see this corner building. It said Budweiser, Miller, Michelob, Heineken. I said, "Shit, there it is. That's what that guy was talking about." So I stopped there, pull in, grab a 6-pack, put it on the counter. I said, "Sir, how much do you want for the 6-pack?" At that point, I was going to pay whatever. He looked at me funny again. He goes, "You can't buy the 6-pack." So at that point, I was a little bit thoroughly confused. So I'm thinking, I'm going to the supermarket. I can't find no beer.
Mm.
I find the beer and they won't let me buy it. And I said, what the hell is going on over here? And I told that story to the guy in the counter. He goes, well, you can buy the beer, but you're going to have to buy the whole case. The guy tells me.
Mm.
I go, so let me get this straight. I go, I'm new around here.
Mm.
So what you're telling me, so I'm straight from here on, me to buy a 6-pack, you want me to buy a whole case to get plastered. Is that what you're telling me?
Mm.
So it was a little getting used to all the Quaker laws and having to go to the state liquor store to get some Hennessy or some Crown Royal. It was an educational experience, man, to say the least. It took me a while to get used to it, but it gave me a much more national and world perspective on things that I think long term did me so good. Did me a little bit of good.
I hear that. So, when did Full Court Press start?
Well, Full Court Press started about a little bit after I started my team, because my brother's last year in high school, he was unsigned at the moment, and at that point, like I said, Slam and Jam was focusing on a lot of the higher name kids, the kids that the high majors, the Big East quality, Pac-12 quality. They weren't doing a lot of low major or bubble D1 or mid major. And I had some kids that played with my brother that were really good, and they ended up winning the '94 California JUCO championship a year later, and they needed somewhere to play. So I entered a team in the Slam and Jam had a unsigned senior division, and we ended up winning that year. That was my first team. We ended up winning that division. I remember Walt Simon. I don't know if you know Walt Simon, the father of Miles Simon,
right,
who just passed away in the last year or two. Walt was a great college player himself at Utah, and I think he played professionally overseas. And Walt was the referee in that game years ago. He was reffing. And then Miles would be in win a national championship at Arizona. I think he played the NBA for a little bit. He's now with the Lakers and on their coaching staff right now. Was an assistant at Arizona where he played as well. And I started doing events under the Full Court Press name with that first fall tournament, and later extended it to do a scouting service about a year, 2 years later. And so I ended up having concurrently events under Full Court Press and the scouting service covering Southern California from Fresno to the north, to the Mexican border to the south, and to the Arizona-Nevada line. So that's how that started. And then the Pangos started in 2003, where I started using Pangos for a lot of the premier events that I was doing, with the Dream Classic with LeBron. I started my All-American camp that same year. Later on in the spring, actually, Kyle Lowry was in that first Pangos camp back in 2003. So he's getting up there in age now. It's amazing how many years he's lasted, especially at a high level, considering doesn't have great size. He's not a super athlete. He's just a very smart and skilled player that knows how to play and can play. It lasted all these years, but he was in the very first camp in 2003 with Aaron Flalo in Cypress, California. So that was kind of the beginning, and they kind of mushroomed from there, and able to have some good events. And then later on, I came up with the concept of the Fab 48 in Vegas, and I was able to. I was very close friends with Grant Rice, who's now the coach at Bishop Gorman, and has been the coach there for 20 years. He actually, his team, Chaffey College, which was coached by George Tarkanian, Jerry's son, played against my brother's team at Long Beach City College in the semifinals and lost in '94. And that's how far I go back with the Rices, because his brother, Dave Rice, was an assistant coach at that time. He had been a player on that great team, UNLV, with Larry Johnson and Stacey Augman, Greg Anthony. and later ended up being the coach at UNLV. Now he's a coach at University of Washington, and that's how far back I go with the Rices. So I ended up kind of realizing when Bishop Gorman built a brand new campus in Vegas in the end of the 2000s, I realized that we could configure it for 3 courts. So I came up with the concept of the Fab 48, got Grant on board, brought Gary Charles in as another partner, and that's how that whole thing got created. And we had a good 7-year run, and with the NCAA demolishing the end of the July period, it really killed the opportunity to have that thing keep going.
That's crazy. I mean, shout outs to Gary Charles for everything he's doing with the well, he's running it under a different name now, but I used to hear a lot about the Fab 48. I even saw videos like that's pretty dope.
Yeah, we had a good run. We had a good run, and then I think the AAU event business is a lot like the club business, whether it's New York or Vegas. You have to keep reinventing yourself every so often. There's no more Studio 54.
Right.
In New York, and no more Studio 54. It's something new always on the block, something fresh. You almost have to keep recreating yourself, reimagining yourself. So I think grassroots is a lot like that as well. We had a pretty good run, and I think this year too, I think we'll have a lot more interaction with a lot of the shoot teams playing each other. My understanding is there won't be any live periods until the summertime. I think you'll see a lot of interaction in the spring at certain venues and locations by people who are able to have the relationships to bring people together. And I think once we get past this year, it'll take us probably another year to be a little bit abnormal. And then starting in 2022, I think we'll get back to getting back to some sense of normal. Although, now you're hearing the overtime. There was some kind of report that overtime was trying to do, which reminds me of some rumors and whispers I'd heard about Nike doing something similar. So if that is true, then that may force Nike to show their hand closer or quicker than they probably wanted to. And it's going to be once Nike and other people that have way more leverage in that space,
right,
that have the leverage relationships and loyalty of these players, it's going to be interesting to see how overtime can compete with that, because the money, if they think they're going to be paying everybody $100,000, I'm not quite sure what type of revenue.
About that on Twitter. I remember I saw that.
It'll be interesting to see if they can fill arenas. And then obviously, LeVar Ball tried it, and even at that time, Melo had a tremendous on paper or digital paper, whatever you want to call it, following, but it didn't translate into butts in the seats, and that's why they didn't go for another year. Because obviously, if they were making money on the league, human nature said they would have done it again. So it's a tough situation, and normally these type of things have a certain brief lifespan. The only real non-NBA league that really had any type of traction was the old original ABA, and even them, they folded part of their better teams into the NBA. Whether it was the Denver Nuggets, Spurs, I believe, was an ABA team at first. There were certain teams that in the ABA that were strong enough to be merged into the NBA, and actually the NBA was smart enough back then to kind of cut them off before they got going, and they probably took a gamble on trying to eliminate their competition, whether or not it had truly a long-term chance to have any impact on them or not. So almost similar to what Steve Ballmer did with the Clippers. He's trying to build a stadium or arena near the Rams arena in Inglewood, right across from the Forum. And there was a conflict there because Madison Square Garden Company, I believe, owns Forum now. And they don't use it for basketball anymore. But when the Lakers played there during Showtime years ago, they used the Forum for big concerts, like Bad Bunny or Jay-Z or somebody who's going to bring, 15, 20,000 people in. So they had some kind of legal litigation pending. So instead of Ballmer going to court and delaying his own project, he said, hey, I'm just going to buy them, get them out of the picture. So he ended up buying the facility that he's probably not going to use from Madison Square Garden Company just to get them out of the equation so he can do what he really wanted to do. So that's how it would happen sometimes, where people kind of resolve things by eliminating people there seem to be problems or competitors. So it's going to be interesting to see with this overtime league. My biggest issue here too is I think there's nothing wrong with kids having hoop dreams, and the famous documentary Hoop Dreams is well known. But there's also, I think, part of the problem here is when you have singular dreams and you only have one option or one plan, and you don't have a plan B or plan C. Sometimes that plan A going wrong might not happen of no fault of your own. Maybe it's an injury. Maybe you get blackballed like Raymond Lewis got blackballed. You need a plan B and plan C. And we're having so many of these kids chase this NBA rabbit down that hole. We're having casualties. And we had the documentary with Lenny Cook. And people don't realize Lenny Cook in high school was a bad man in high school. He wasn't a guy that you could, he was giving pros the business in high school. He was a bad man. And at some point went wrong with him. You have Shea Cotton's documentary. And Shea in high school was as great an athlete as there ever was as a freshman in high school. And he had a lot of reasons why things went wrong for him that's in that documentary. So nobody's guaranteed. There's nothing wrong with having other dreams other than hoop dreams. When you have hoop dreams alone and nothing to fall back on, you end up contributing to all the inequalities we now face as a country. We talk about inequalities and the COVID, inequalities of who's getting the vaccine. A lot of that inequality stems from lack of education. When people value education and they understand the real value of it, those are the communities that flourish. And you see that a lot with immigrants, not just with European immigrants, but with Asian immigrants, African immigrants that come here that value education, whose kids do extremely well in school. Obama's dad was an academic. I had a player that played for me, Zena Edosamwan, who was a Nigerian who went to one of the best private high schools in the country, Harvard Westlake. He turned down high major schools to go to Harvard so he could graduate from Harvard. He was good enough to be there as a student and qualified to be there. When you value education, so many more doors open to you, and you don't have all your eggs in one basket. And we're doing our young kids a disservice when we make them believe that it has to be the NBA or bust. When we make them believe that 1 year at college or more than 1 year is like going to prison at San Quentin, or what's the prison up in upstate New York that's famous, where they had the guy escaped up there. You know what I'm talking about? The guy that escaped into the manhole about 5 years ago. Anyway, they think that going to college is a prison, but at the end of the day, that college experience, even if you don't get the degree, that college learning, that college connections. I tweeted out yesterday, the day before, a great example of this. Quentin Junior Bridgman played for the Louisville Cardinals in the 70s. He helped Denny Crum go to the Final Four, lost to UCLA. He played 4 years of college. He was a first-round pick of the Lakers. played for the Bucks most of the other 12 years. He ended up with the Clippers, where he made the most money he ever made in 1 year, his last year, $350K. So he probably made throughout his 12-year NBA career maybe 2.5 to 5 million in there for 12 years. He was smart enough, apparently, to benefit from his education and to learn a few things along the way. When he got out, he took that 2.5, 5 million, whatever he saved, and he bought 160 Wendy's. He bought 120 plus Chili's. He bought other things. And now, 4 years ago, when he cashed out, he was worth 600 million from 2 to 3 million. But again, managing 160 Wendy's, you can't be dumb to do that. You got to have some level of high intelligence, of high organizational skills to be able to manage that amount of stores and to do so successfully. But people discounting education and focusing only on the NBA and lying to these kids, and because the reality is very few kids are going to last there more than a couple of years. Most, even if you make it there, which is hard, less than 1% make it there, and even less last there enough to get a pension or enough to make any kind of meaningful dollars. Then what? What are you doing next? And that's part of having the right balance. And we all love basketball, and we all want people to pursue what their passion is, but don't do it with a one lane mentality, with a single tunnel mentality. Be diverse in your goals, be diverse in your approach, because again, you never know. Lenny Cook, if you would have asked people back in Lenny Cook's junior year, is this guy an NBA player? 99% would have said yes. You would have asked people back in Shea Cotton's freshman year in high school, is this guy a lottery pick? 99% would have said yes. So you have to be prepared for everything that comes your way. And we do our kids a disservice by making them believe that they're only worth anything if they make the league. You can be worth a lot of other things, being a lawyer, a leader, a CEO, a doctor, a teacher, a community leader, etc. Ways to impact your community, as much as being an NBA player.
You just said a whole mouthful, but those are facts, Dinos. Those are real facts. That's true. And if there's any young youth listening to this, he speaks wisely. This is real, because a lot of people aren't gonna. People talk about making it to the NBA, and many make it but don't last. And it's just like a lot of, like, even in the entertainment business, there's a lot of kids that are famous. They achieve fame at a very young age. They could be big at
Gary
12.
Coleman. Gary Coleman.
Mm-hmm.
Also, another good example is a friend of mine, Jaleel White, who was famous for Urkel. And Jaleel became too famous too soon, and so many people identified him with that character. Right. It was hard for him to have any other roles later on in movies or motion pictures, because when people would identify him with that particular character, and you would not be able to cast him in your mind in any other role.
Right. But yeah, like a lot of people, like they get famous. They could be famous by the age of 12 or 13, and then by 18 to 20 years old, they're washed up. Unfortunately, for lack of a better term. And that's sad, but yeah, that's the way it is. But moving forward, let's talk about the Pangos Dream Classic. Now, 2000, like you had a whole bunch of players, in the event, but there's two instances I really want to talk about. So 2003, that was the major year when you had LeBron James in there and Paulie Pavilion, and you had over 12,000. Talk about that year with LeBron. And rumor has it that y'all had a Cadillac Escalade pick him and Saint V up at the airport.
Well, here's how the whole thing went down. It actually started way back from a year before. He was on the issue of the cover of Sports Illustrated as a junior, and then he had gotten hurt his end of junior year. I think he got hurt in Houston, Texas, at John Urie's tournament. He broke his wrist or something, or he might have broke his wrist in Chicago. I forgot what it was. He was playing somewhere, and he didn't play in the summertime. Although he went to watch ABCD, and he also went to watch Nike as well at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But I was and still am good friends with Chris Rivers, who used to be with Adidas. And I had heard LeBron James speak for the first time on I think it was a newspaper website, a post-game interview or something. And when I heard him speak for the first time, I thought to myself, this guy's Muhammad Ali. Mm-hmm. It reminded me of the way he spoke and his thoughtfulness and his tone and his professionalism and the gravitas that he has. This is Muhammad Ali.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, let me see if I can get him out, because I was aware of a personal story of his and his youth team that some people at that point didn't either remember or knew about. When he was in the 8th grade, he was on a team that lost in the finals of the 14 and under nationals to a team from California that had 3 players that were at that time on Mater Dei's team, mm-hmm. 2 of whom were playing on my Belmont Shore team at the time. Harrison Shane, who went to Princeton, and Wesley Washington, who played at Oregon State. And the coach for the high school was the coach a couple of years earlier, the coach of the youth team. And he had taken his son, LeBron, Romeo, Travis, I think the football kid that went to Ohio State, I forgot his name.
Sheon Cotton.
Yeah, the other Cotton. He had taken those kids to St. Vincent, St. Mary's,
right,
and was the assistant coach there. And when Keith Dambrot left to go back to college, he became the head coach.
Right, Drew Joyce.
So when I approached Drew Joyce Sr. with the idea of coming to UCLA and playing Mater Dei, I had known that story. I had known that background. So when I pitched him as almost like a revenge game, he was all in. Mm-hmm. He was foaming at the mouth, so to speak. Like he wanted some revenge. In the back of his mind, it was unfinished business. So it wasn't a hard sell to get him to come there first. And then later on that summer during the Las Vegas big time tournament, that was during the live period, I had met with Drew Joyce to finalize the details of how many airline tickets they wanted, rooms, etc. So that came, I had a feeling it was going to be a big deal, but I had no idea it was going to be that big. So as we got closer, I had offered the game to Fox Sports, and they had turned it down back in the fall of 2002. And at that time, I had a friend of mine who was in the shoe international trading shoe business that had contacts in Korea. And I was exploring the feasibility of potentially making a shoe under the Pangos brand. That is true. And I had visited some factories in South Korea to explore that possibility. So when LeBron James played Oak Hill at Cleveland State in December of 2002, the first game he was on ESPN2. I was in Korea, and I remember going down. I was at the Westin Hotel in Busan, Korea, South Korea, and I went downstairs to get breakfast. and it was an international hotel with international businessmen there from all over the world. So they had USA Today, they had Wall Street Journal, other English papers. And I picked up the USA Today, and on the front page of the sports section, you had a recap of the game, and the headline, it was high school game draws the second highest rating at that time in the history of ESPN2, behind a Dale Earnhardt race.
Wow.
So I thought, hey man, this thing's got a chance to have it, maybe beat the crowd I had for those Dominguez Crenshaw games. I might get 10. I'm thinking I'm getting 9 to 10. So I get back home, and at that point we still had the old answering recorders on our landline phone. You come home, you press the button, and you get your messages. So I came home, and I had a lot of messages. I was going through my messages a couple of days later, and then on my answering machine, I had a message from Burke Magnus, who's now still the head of programming at ESPN Sports, said that he wanted to talk to me about doing the game on January 3rd. And apparently, Dick Vitale, who I had gotten to know throughout the years, I think gave him my number, and he wanted to televise the game. And that's how that whole thing happened. Dick Vitale was supposed to be on the game, but if you remember at all back then, you might have been too young. Dick was getting some flack from guys like Billy Packer about them exploiting high school players. So Dick kind of stood back, and we had Bill Walton, Jay Billis, and who's the guy that does all the play-by-play now, the main guy?
Paul Biancardi.
No, the play-by-play, not the color. He's on all the NBA games. He's on the college games, top games. He's a well-known, the guy with the short hair. Anyway, we'll figure his name out in a minute. If you see this guy, you know what I'm talking about. So they did the game, and that's how that whole thing started. So when we were picking him up from the airport, what ended up happening was I had a friend of mine who was a sponsor of the game, and he had a couple of different companies. One was a limo company. And instead of me renting a van to pick him up, he gave me the use of the limo for free. So I got to the airport to pick them up. We had the limo, a huge limo. But what I didn't know, though, I remember when they came down the escalator, LeBron James was the first guy down the escalator. And I remember seeing him and saying, "Welcome to LA, LeBron." Sees me, shakes my hand. But I had coached against LeBron 2 years earlier in Oakland at a tournament with my Belmont short team. So I saw him as a player back then. So we were waiting for our luggage, and his mother, I see his mother, and I go, she wasn't coming with us. And I said, "Gloria, you're not coming to the hotel?" She said, "I got my own room." I go, "Where are you staying at?" She says, "Beverly Hills." I said, "Oh." So left that alone. So we get out to the curbside, and out of nowhere, there was like 2 or 3 paparazzis jumping behind corners of buildings, behind columns, taking pictures.
Wow.
And it was photographers from Sports Illustrated, because there was a store, if you remember the story,
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
that came in afterwards. And I think it was Grant Wall, W-O-H-L, was the famous writer for Sports Illustrated, where the first paragraph starts, it says, "If you ever want to document the moment that LeBron James became an A-list Hollywood celebrity, let this date be relevant." It was that moment where they popped around the corner with the cameras, and they saw us picking him up in the limo. In the limo. And people didn't understand, it was really a free limo that was saving me a lot of money on the van cost. So, but people thought it was, the VIP treatment in Hollywood, A-list, kind of played into that narrative. And actually, I'd take them out to eat. We had a kind of a meal schedule. We had a banquet at Lowry's Beverly Hills, which is a sponsor. They sponsored the media luncheon. That's the famous prime rib place where they do the Rose Bowl media luncheon.
Right.
And actually, LeBron, to my recollection, talking to his coach at the time, was kind of a finicky eater, and he didn't want the prime rib. Somebody went and got him Burger King because one of my photographers got a picture of him holding a Burger King bag and a drink.
They were everywhere.
So we spoke there, and then he wanted to go to see the beach. At that time, I had a 15-passenger van that I was also using. So I told him, meet me downstairs. We were staying at the Sheraton LAX hotel. I had him over there, not far from the airport. So I pick him up. We're going down to Manhattan Beach. At that time, I'm getting calls like every 2 minutes from people that want tickets. You know, Jaleel White wanted tickets. Denzel Washington wanted tickets. Dustin Hoffman wanted tickets. You know, the list goes on and on. So all of a sudden, I'm driving, and LeBron's in the passenger seat, and I get another call. Pick up the phone, and it was some publicist from a rapper at that time I had never heard of before that wanted tickets. I said, ma'am, I've never heard of this guy before. What was his name again? And she said 50 Cent. And I said, 50 what?
Wow.
50 Cent. And I go, ma'am, I'm sorry. I've never heard of this cat before. This guy, just a new guy and LeBron heard it. And he goes, who is it? 50 who? I go, what's the rapper's name again? And she goes, 50 Cent. And I said, LeBron, some guy named 50 Cent wants tickets. And LeBron apparently knew who he was. He goes, yeah, I love that guy. And I told the lady, hey, he'll have 2 tickets at will call. He can pick it up there.
So 50 Cent actually pulled up to the game.
Well, he asked for tickets. The guy, you know, then also we had the Nike, Phil Knight came. We had Sonny Vaccaro. It was all the, you know, the NBA.
Yeah.
You know, we had a lot of the NBA scouts were there as well. We had basically almost every NBA team in the league was there. Then the year after as well, we even had more with Dwight Howard, Robert Swift, and Sebastian. And Sebastian actually was also the year of LeBron. He was the nightcap after LeBron. And I'll never forget that after LeBron James's game, we were in the press conference on one of the side rooms, and all we could hear is the crowd going ooh and ah, because Bassey was putting on a show in that first quarter. For those that stayed, the crowd was about 12,500 for the main game. It probably went down to about 7 that stuck around. But Bassey, as a junior, was put on a show.
Sorry about that. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was clicking on Instagram. But yeah, you were saying?
Yeah, but Bassey put on a show as a junior. He was actually playing against DeMarcus Nelson that game, who ended up going to Duke and had a great career there, played in the NBA for a couple of years, and then over in Europe. But that was a 50 Cent requested tickets. Now, I don't know if he ever showed up. We had, you know, it was actually quite a circus, if you can imagine. I had people calling me every 10 minutes for tickets, and then it was almost like at that point it was overrun. We had, and it was we were at full capacity. There was actually probably more people there than had tickets, because we had so many people coming into the pass gate. Who knows who was in there?
It's Paulie Pavilion. This is not no regular venue. Like,
on ESPN too. So that was actually at that time. That might have been the biggest attended, the most attended game in the history of California since probably that's a non, like a state final or association final, sectional final, or state final game in the last probably 50 years in California.
That one game, wow. Like, I can only imagine how crazy those games with Sierra Canyon was. Because I remember last year when they came out to Jersey, to Toms River to play Long Island Lutheran. That was an ESPN game too. Like, they had it. It was crazy. They had these two big security guards with them, and I knew them from the Nike EYBL. So they, you know what I'm saying? Like they even, that was so crazy that even people from the stands, they didn't even want, this was prior to COVID, a month prior to the whole, before the pandemic took place. This was actually around this time. So like they said, oh, you got I guess some people were walking around the team and they were like, oh, who the fuck is that? Tell him to sit the fuck down. I'm like, yo, these guys are all jacked up. Guess they taking steroids or something like that. Like they, yeah, like
actually, the Sierra Canyon the last couple of years, they've never played in a crowd like, the only thing close to that was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. The semifinals had kind of coincided where you had Marvin Bagley and Sierra Canyon playing Bishop Montgomery with Ethan Thompson, Jordan Shackle from San Diego State, David Singleton in one semifinal. And you had Mater Dei playing Chino Hills in the other. You had Mellow Ball, his brother, Jello, Eli Scott, Big O, Nico Congo, and Mater Dei had Spencer Friedman, Michael Wang, who plays for Penn. They moved those two games to USC, which holds, I believe, 10,000, and that was almost full, basically about full. That was the only other time there was ever a crowd anywhere near the LeBron James thing, because the last couple of years, the high school association they've been playing their games. Like last year, they played their final in a final in a 5,000 seat arena at Long Beach State. Only 5,000. It was sold out, but who knows? We don't have any idea how much more. Would it would have been 7? Would it have been 10? I doubt they would have had 12 or 13,000. But they never really played Sierra Canyon other than the Marvin Bagley year and also there was also Manute Bobo was in the Mater Dei's team. It was Bobo, Michael Wang, Spencer Friedman versus Big O, who's now with the Hawks, Mellow Ball, Jello Ball, Eli Scott in the one semi. And then Bishop Montgomery had the guys that I mentioned versus Marvin Bagley, Cody Riley, DeVeral Ramsey, who went to Nevada, now at Santa Barbara, and others in that Sierra Canyon. That was the only other game that I recall that wasn't a final, like a sectional final or a state final. I don't believe most of the state finals in California never had that many people in a building at the same time. There may have been 12,000 over the course of 9 a.m. to 10 p.m., 4 or 5 games that filtered in and out of there. But there's never been a crowd in California of that many people all at the same time watching one game like it was with LeBron James in 2003.
Yeah, man. It's probably never going to be like anything like that moving forward. And shout outs to the Sierra Canyon program. They actually have a documentary coming out February 26th about last year. Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's gonna be on IMDb TV.
Really?
Yeah, so
February 22nd, huh?
26th.
Oh.
Yeah, so I'm gonna definitely check out that documentary. So
yeah, there's a lot of good documentary. Like Raymond Lewis's documentary is supposed to be out soon too. That should be.
Yeah, I'm definitely checking that out for sure.
Yeah, that's actually a lot of people in LA are aware of the legend. They really have no kind of visualization of it. You know what I mean? There's been pictures, a couple of different snippets, but it was for some reason very hard finding video of him back then.
That's
although back then though, Dave, they did have big crowds in the 60s and 70s. There is evidence of having 10, 12, 15,000 people at a game back then. It was a much different time and era where you had less entertainment options and less things to do. It was obviously a different era, but like I said, the year after the LeBron James, I had a Dwight Howard play and Drew Holiday was in that game. Dwight Howard lost to Dominguez the year after.
Some good times. So let's segue into the All American camp. 2003, you started the Pangos All American camp, the phenomenon that it is today. Talk about the thought process of when you started that camp.
Well, back then, again, the weekends weren't as cluttered as they are now with events, and I actually found a good weekend right after Memorial Day that normally didn't really have anything of any significance going on. So I thought to myself, this might be an opportunity to do something, non-shoe affiliated on the West Coast, to kind of have something for the West Coast kids not to be able to travel back to Indy or places back east, New Jersey, where the ABCD camp was, and to bring kids from east to west and have kind of more of a different experience. So the first one was in Cyprus at an old place called the Warrior Center, which was a private facility that was owned and operated by a private Christian school. And we had 3 courts in there, and we used that for a while. And obviously, Aaron Aflalo, we had Kyle Lowry, James Harden, Russell Westbrook. So from 2003 to about 2006, we had used that facility. And actually, back then, there wasn't the video we have now. And I remember a couple of years back, I had forgot that Russell Westbrook and Harden were on the same camp team at that camp. And Russell Westbrook, I don't know, I'm not sure if he made an all-star game or if he made any of the all-star games, but James Harden was the MVP. We had 2 future MVPs on the same camp team. We had no ability to crystal ball it back then. But there was a kid on that team who was in the camp. I forgot what college he went to. His dad was filming the game, and they found the tape and they put it on Facebook. And somehow I came across it, and you could see them playing in a game. He said, "Hey man, I played with the 2 MVPs at the same camp in the same game," and the way they played, James Harden with the finger roll, the way Westbrook kind of waddled, you saw similarities to their style. And obviously, as they got older and stronger and better, more skilled, but you saw a lot of the foundations of how their playing style is even today. And then the year after, USC had just built a brand new arena and practice facility, and that was before they banned use of the D1 campuses. Yeah. And I used USC's practice facility for a couple of years. And that was good because we had a hotel within walking distance of Radisson Inn on campus there. And John Wall, Brandon Jennings. We had some really good players on those camps. And then the year after, Harrison Barnes, we went to Long Beach, back to Cabrillo High School near downtown. So we used to have a real nice hotel overlooking the water in downtown, which is 5 minutes from the gym. And we used the Cabrillo High School, which had 3 courts there. And it was it wasn't necessarily a huge gym. It was kind of a cozy gym, but it had a really good camp environment. There was a lot of energy, a lot of electricity. Brad Beal was at those camps. Harrison Barnes was the MVP. Then you had guys like DeAndre Daniels, Mike Kabongo, so many different other kids as well. And then we ended up going to Cerritos College for the last, seems like maybe 5 to 7 years. We've been at Cerritos College, which is a nice facility and a good place to have a camp. So yeah, and 1 year in there, we were at the Cal State Dominguez Hills with Andre Drummond, Shabazz Muhammad, Aaron Gordon, Alex Caruso, Chris Dunn was at that camp. Stanley Johnson, Grant Jarrett, Tyler Dorsey, Steven Zimmerman, several other good players. Archie Goodwin as well. Anthony Bennett was a future #1 pick, also in that camp, played very well there. And then we've had it up until recently at Cerritos College. And then this past year, as you probably know, we were having trouble because of the COVID of having a big camp. So we decided to do a smaller format of having 40 guys representing different regions. And that worked out very well in Arizona back in November 6th and 7th. We had 2 games Saturday, 2 games Sunday. We had a Final Four, and then we had a third place in the championship with Chet Holmgren, Paolo Banchero, Jabari Smith, Michael Foster, and several other really good, Rasul Diggins, several other really good players there. And that's something probably that we're not going to replace in the main camp with. But since it worked so well, we might have used that format for another part of the year. Maybe the top 40 kids later on to come and play in that kind of format, because it worked real well. And the kids really competed very well when they were representing the regions.
So 2021, what's the plan for Pangos?
Well, we're trying to get back on track for the same weekend. That's the target. That's our goal. Obviously, we're dependent on things cleaning up COVID-wise. So there is the possibility that we may, if California's not open, we may go to Vegas or elsewhere as well. But I think it's going to happen somewhat close to normal, with the normal 100 kids or so. Probably the first week in June. Although, as you know, the calendar is with the high school seasons being in a state of flux and so many different variables going on, that it probably is wise to be flexible right now for a lot of different reasons, and not get too caught up and too stubbornly stringent into certain types of windows, because okay.
Yeah, you were saying?
No, I'm saying, I think now in the age of COVID, I think you got to be flexible, and I think you got to be smart. I think ultimately a lot of people that I know that want to do events, and a lot of those who are not connected to shoot teams, are not connected to big sponsors, they don't understand there is a pecking order. There is a totem pole. There's an order of things, and they want to be organized, but they don't understand the pecking order. Before you can strategically make the best decision, you got to know what the other big boys are doing first. They want to kind of put their cart in front of them, and they don't understand that the big boys want to do something that same weekend where you had grand visions. All the work you did planning is now worthless, and you're starting from scratch again. So you got to let those guys, show their hand, and then you show yours or react to it. And that's sometimes harder to get people to understand that it's not about being organized before anybody else is doing things strategically and smartly, and staying in your lane and filling that niche. And being successful versus being first to do something.
And I read an article about you in 2013 where you had a little situation with Nike.
A guy who's no longer there, by the way, a guy who actually I outlasted. He lasted less at Nike than I lasted in the event business. But here's a guy who was also implicated in those FBI trials. We won't talk about his name because it doesn't bear me repeating.
Right.
But it obviously shows, he was doing some things that were questionable enough for Nike to part ways with them. And then he resurfaced, and then similar things kind of got caught up in the public nature of those FBI proceedings and federal legal criminal proceedings. So it's all about, I think, fairness and being part of the solution. And there's nothing wrong with the shoe companies doing what they do.
Mm-hmm.
I think all of them do a good job with, depending on the resources. And I know I have friends in all those different spheres.
Right.
But there is something I think problematic. Shoe companies believing they own teams and players when they just sponsor them. I asked a Nike executive one time, do you own these teams or do you sponsor these teams?
Mm-hmm.
And he thought he couldn't really answer. He couldn't understand at first, and then he couldn't answer.
Mm-hmm.
I go, you guys act like you own these teams
Mm-hmm.
when you're really sponsoring these teams. It's almost like you have a 7-day a week, 24-hour a day ownership of these guys, when in fact, they're only obligated to you under contract for certain weekends of the years and for certain purposes. You don't have the right to tell them when to go to the bathroom, when to have a shoot around, when to have a practice. You don't own them every weekend. There's nothing in your contract that allows you to own them every weekend. And when you get involved in putting things or holding them to obligations that are not in the contract, you're almost adding terms to the contract that don't exist, because you're using your flexibility for other non-shoe company purposes, because you want to support some other event organizer you're in bed with, or maybe you're getting a piece of the action, or maybe you want to maintain influence and control over certain teams and players.
Right.
So that's part of the problem. I think the shoe companies do a good job, but there's got to be more opportunity for cross intersection of all these teams and the non-shoe teams. Yeah. And the great example that I can give on that is Nike is like the ACC. Adidas might be the Big 10. Under Armour might be the Big 12. They play within their leagues. They have great league tournaments on TV. You see the battles, the rivalries. But when they're done with that, there's a big NCAA tournament where everybody is welcome, where you have the Murray States and the Ja Morants that are waiting there to be the Cinderella. When you have Steph Curry and the Davidsons waiting there, there's nothing wrong with these teams and kids from playing against other people that don't get free shoes like they do. There's nothing wrong with them to compete. There is something monotonous of playing and seeing the same people over and over and over again and not have any ability to cross compete against other people. It's not good for these kids' development, in my opinion.
Right. So let me read a little bit from that article. So it says, when it comes to feeding unrealistic expectations, it's difficult to imagine anyone escaping blame, from sports writers overselling the latest Cinderella story to college coaches recruiting 8th graders to, guys like Trigonis, who help provide a platform for all of the mania. To hear Trigonis tell it, though, a chunk of the blame falls on sneaker companies for seducing kids into believing practically anyone can be the next LeBron. Kids are being showered with superficial materialism, he says. They don't wear the same shoes twice. Their kindness and humility evaporate. They start thinking they're better than the kid at the desk next to them in school just because Nike is showering them with free stuff. But if they don't turn out to be the next big thing, Nike's not around anymore. There's another reason why Nike is a sore subject. Earlier this year, blank, who heads Nike's Elite Youth Basketball League, began what Trigonis believes is a concerted effort to discourage Nike-sponsored club teams from playing in the kind of neutral tournaments he puts on, events not affiliated with any shoe company. Relations have soured to the point where Nike denied Trigonis media credentials to its LeBron James Skills Academy this summer. They view me as a threat because I'm standing in the way, he says. They want the kids to attribute their success to Nike, not an independent guy, so that when they're stars and it comes time to endorse a product, they'll feel loyal to Nike. Wow, that's yeah.
Well, I think ultimately too is part. I think does that come from the LA Magazine article? Is that what it
Yeah, the
is?
LA Times.
Oh, LA Times. Yeah, it just did. I think again
Yeah, you're
the
right. It was the LA Mag.
LA Magazine, which is I think a monthly,
Mm.
and I forgot the name of the writer. He's a good guy. It's escaping my memory right now. Yeah, but again, the
Patrick
ultimate, I think
Goldstein.
huh?
Patrick Goldstein was the writer.
Yeah, Patrick Goldstein, great guy, great guy. But yeah, I think ultimately this, it just, the way I view it is, there's a lot of opportunity out there. I think the danger with allowing any one person to control the gateway to these kids, whether development wise, influence wise. I think it's a danger. It's a concern, and I was also on this on the Sonny Vaccaro documentary, Soul Influence, as well, and there's casualties here because they're going through guys to get to the few guys that really are going to stick, that really have value, and the guys that don't are like disposable gloves or disposable, you know, diapers. They're out in the trash.
Or
And,
Kleenex
and
tissue, for
yeah,
lack of a better
tissue.
term.
Yeah, and there's not enough. Again, a large part of the experience is not just the result; it's the journey. And when you have people that interact that are from different areas, I think that you produce a much better competitive element. It goes back to my previous example about the NCAA tournament. There needs to be some type of unifying force and breakdown of artificial barriers, because people are competing based upon shoe affiliation
Mm-hmm.
versus competing based upon love of the game and just wanting to compete against everybody and against the best.
Mm-hmm.
And for many years, that same guy we talked about and others were discouraging people from coming to my camp. Although, as the history and track record shows, I've had more than my fair share of players there. But all they were doing, they did a disservice to the kid for not allowing him to have that another experience, just for the sake of maybe trying to control that person. Maybe they assumed that I was doing things for the same reason, illegitimate reasons they were. Maybe they assumed because they were trying to get in bed with agents, potentially or theoretically, or trying to gain influence with kids and families to have that kind of influence, that I had to have the same frame of mind or attitude. And I think it's just a sad thing in America where you're sponsoring teams and you're acting like you own them.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a sad state of affairs. And I had a conversation one time with a pretty big Nike coach, the same conversation. And I told them, hey, listen, if I was you, I tell them, if you want to own you right now, you're sponsoring me. If you want to own me, then pay me like you own me. Don't pay me like you sponsor me and act like you own me. Pay me like you own me then. If you're going to dictate to me what I can't do or can do at times that are not involved in the contract.
Right.
So that was kind of an interesting discussion. It kind of dawned on them, but they're kind of scared to go against the current, so to speak.
Right.
And I think they've lost track of, and I've raised this question with them before. I go, what is your value? Is your value because you're on the Nike circuit, or is your value because your brand speaks for itself? If your value is because you're only on the Nike circuit, then you're expendable. You really have no value because you're replaceable very easily. if your value is separate from the circuit, where you have tremendous tradition value in your area that you're located, then they have to negotiate on your terms if they want to keep you.
Absolutely.
And that's part of the problem, is the people that have the real value, they don't fully comprehend that. And that because the value is on their team is the value, not necessarily the brand. I mean, nothing wrong with playing in an EYBL, and they do a fantastic job, and Adidas does a good job with their circuit and Under Armour as well. But if you really want to have a true AAU program that has value, then you have to have value apart from the shoe contract. Now, I've had chances to go and play on the shoe circuit for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't stop me from having pros on my team.
Right.
I've had pros and NCAA champions and lottery picks and college All-Americans with no shoe deal. I've turned down shoe deals. And they were surprised, because the shoe deal, in retrospect, and in many cases, prevents you from doing what's best for the kid. Right. It forces you to do what's best for the shoe company and not necessarily your kid. And that's where I've drawn the line. And because I was maybe smart enough, for lack of a better word, to create other platforms to give myself value apart from having a deal, I was able to attract and retain my share of top players throughout the years that have played on my teams.
Wow. You just basically asked about, you really pretty much answered my question without me asking it. The question I was going to say is, how was it, why didn't you ever join a sneaker company? But you just answered that.
Well, part of it, yes. The other part too is this: I run events, and the reality is this: for the most part, with minor exceptions, okay, a shoe deal doesn't provide you with 100% of what you need to operate, especially if you have multiple teams, especially if you're required to take care of players beyond the immediate player. If the parents want to come on every trip, if the uncle wants to come on every trip, if the baby brother wants to come on every trip, if the baby mama wants to come on every trip, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't cover everything. Wow. So in many cases, is you're spending money out of your pocket promoting a $1 billion company. It may be a thrill for a year or two. It may have some sort of ecstatic feeling to it. But from a business standpoint, who would answer a job of a $1 billion company? Say, we're not going to pay you a salary. We're going to pay you 75% of your expenses. You're going to have to fundraise the other 25%, but you get to say you work for us. Who would work that? Nobody would work that. That's dumb business. Now, I was offered a contract by one of the big three, if not the biggest. And the reason I turned it down was I would have had to give up my events, because my team, in many cases, are the flagship programs for a lot of my events, including the live period. So I was going to go from a scenario where, do I just want to say I'm sponsored by so-and-so, right? Maybe get free gear, which I could easily get one of my other pros to give them out of their allotment or pay for it myself, or lose a good amount of money just to say I'm on a circuit. So from a business standpoint, it didn't make any sense. And like I said, I had enough of other platforms to reward the people, the players that were loyal to me, giving them opportunity in high visibility platforms where they had some benefit being affiliated or rolling with me, if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah. Well said.
So again, it comes down to the thrill of it. In most cases, people, again, now what they're doing in some of these other things where they're having second tier affiliations, and you know who I'm talking about, the Under Armour, Adidas, and it's almost like you have AAU teams committing, I hate to use the word fraud because it's too much of a word, fraud on their players' parents and families, thinking they're sponsored when they're not. It's almost like it's in some ways there is a deception there, because the average parent gets a free bag from a shoe company and they think they're sponsored, but they don't realize, well, I'm still paying $1,000 a month to play. But I'm part of something. You're really not. You're not part of the top bracket. You're not part of the main courts or the main gym. And you have a lot of that going on as well. Instead of realizing that that particular team doesn't have high major players, it may not even have mid-major players. It may have one low major and others Division II, and that's okay. But you got to know your niche of your team, and you got to tailor your program and your circuit to where it benefits your players. That's why I see all the time local teams who may have players that are potentially recruitable from a regional standpoint. They leave their local area during a live period to go across the country to play in something that has a shoe name attached to it, although they're in the second and third site. And there's really nobody in those areas at those level of schools, low major, bubble, Division I, Division II, Division III, that would have an interest in their kids when all those similar schools are back where they live, not where they're, and you mistakenly give your kids a deception.
Yeah, a false sense
that
of
somehow
reality.
You're giving them a better recruiting opportunity, where all you're doing is taking a trip somewhere that really doesn't have any value.
Right. You dropping some knowledge tonight. You dropping some real knowledge. So let's talk about Nothing But Net, your magazine. So you've been running that for 12 years now. Talk about a little bit about Nothing But Net.
Yeah, that's been kind of a thing that's been on and off. We got it back on again. Well, we tried to, I had it for a while there. I was trying to get some print edition. We made a couple of printed copies for a couple of years. John Wall was on the front first issue. And recently we've kind of moved to an online version to kind of give a chance for somebody like Van Coleman, chance to release his rankings, have a platform for him, a platform to cover and get the word out on some players. I think the guys right now, there's a lot of changes in that area now, a lot of consolidations, a lot of people moving in and out of that business. Evan Daniels is now working as a coaching agent for, I believe, CAA, I could be wrong. A couple other guys left are now filling spots on NBA scouting departments when it comes to high school informational scouting. Eric Bossie's moved from Rivals to 24/7. I think those paywalls are things that are crumbling. I think those businesses, I'm not sure, with the exception of certain fan bases that cover a certain team or two or three, are relatively doing that well. Most people now, with information being so freely available through Twitter and Instagram, very few are inclined to pay to go behind the wall anymore when they're getting it for free. So if somebody posts it on Instagram or they'll post it on Twitter, and somebody who paid for it realizes other people are getting that same thing for free, I'm not paying for it anymore.
Exactly.
So it's kind of a free website to help supplement the events that I do. Most of the events that I do, especially the major ones, get exceptional print and digital and video coverage. It's just kind of another layer of talking about other kids that may have not been talked about, and coaches having that information, because at the end of the day, part of my event purpose, if not a large chunk of it, is to help the kids and the more information that's available that can be positive toward a kid and help him get the attention and recognition that he deserves is a plus. So it's kind of a supplement. It's not necessarily a competitor to those other groups because we're not as frequent as they are, but we put together some good pieces and some rankings and things of that nature.
Well said. So let me backtrack a little bit. So back in the 90s, you also had the Eddie Jones All-Star Classic. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, actually, that was a thing that came up when I was at Temple. I actually played against Eddie Jones when he was a prop back in the Prop 48 days. But back then, Temple Recreation Intramurals, I'm not sure what they called it back then, had some really good rec ball because we had really good teams from the law school. I played with at least two guys that were former Division I players on my law school team. A couple other guys that were Division II, Division III players. They were good players too. And then the medical school, I had a kid that played in the ABCD camp. I forgot his name. He was going to medical school there. So we had some good battles back then. And what would happen is the Temple Police Department, they would enter a team with the police guys, but they were close with Cheney, and they would grab a couple of the Prop 48 guys to play. So one of the years that I was playing, Eddie Jones was a prop. Aaron McKee, who played in the NBA, now the head coach, was a prop, 48. So we had some really good battles, and I actually got to know Eddie a little bit from then, but I also knew Vic Kostarfin, who played at Temple and later was Eddie's assistant agent with Sal DeFazio, I believe was the original agent for Eddie. And Vic now coached recently at Camden High School, where he went to school, and left Camden recently. He was elected to the Camden City Council. So back then, I was talking to Eddie, talking to Vic, and Eddie had just joined the Lakers. And I came up with this idea, and Vic said, "Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's see if we do an Eddie Jones All-Star game out here." So we did it at the Great Western Forum the first year. Oh, no, we did it at the Long Beach State Pyramid the first year. And we had Earl Watson was there. We had Greedy Daniels was there. We had Caspers Cambalas was there. Steven Jackson was in that game. Some other guys as well. And Eddie came. Eddie was kind of a shy guy off the court. He really liked it. So we did it the next year with at the Great Western Forum with Richard Jefferson, Luke Walton, Shea Cotton, Tayshaun Prince, Corleone Young, several other guys as well that escaping my memory at the moment. It was a high level game, obviously, and we had it for a 2 or 3 year run there. So that's how that whole thing got played, and that kind of merged into the Dada. I had friends who were doing the Dada footwear for Dada at that point, and they wanted to do an all-star game. So the Eddie Jones game just kind of merged, kind of transformed into the Dada all-star game for 2 years. And we did that at UCLA at the Long Beach State Pyramid. And Gilbert Arenas was in that. Gilbert Arenas and several other top guys. Too many to remember right now. So it was a good run. It was a good run, and we had a lot of fun, and a lot of kids from all over the country, East Coast, West Coast, South. And that was kind of the precursor to what we talked about before that led up to the Pangos All-American Camp experience and the camps that resulted from then.
So speaking of the Pangos All-American Camp, I know you had a whole lot of great experiences in the last 18 years. What was if you could whittle it down to one, what was your your favorite memory of the camp?
Of the camp? the best or the most memorable memory of the camp. I'm sorry about that phone right there.
No, it's cool. Don't worry about it.
Has to be Quinn Cook's year. Quinn Cook's year. I forgot who else was in that camp, but I had the campers staying at the Hyatt Regency Long Beach, right on the water there in the marina. And because I didn't stay at the hotel. I had other staff people stay there because my home was within 5-10 minutes from there, 3 miles. So I would go home after I was done, sleep in my own bed. So I remember one year, it was Quinn's year, because I remember Quinn being outside when I had to come back. I got a call at like 3:30 in the morning. I thought it was a crank call at the time. So this is the general manager from the Hyatt Regency. You need to come. Are you Dinos Trigonis? Are you the director of this camp, this Pangos camp? I said, yes, I am. Is this a crank call? He goes, no. I go, I hope it's not a crank call. I go, what do you want? He goes, you need to come down here right now. So I thought it was one of the kids playing a joke on me. You know what I mean? And I said, what do you mean? Come down there right now. What's going on down there right now? And the manager responded, oh, hell's breaking loose right now.
Just like that.
Like that.
He didn't even want to.
Oh, hell's breaking loose. So I'm thinking, what the hell's going on? So apparently there was a prom going on at the convention center next door. And I roll up, and there's people outside. The Quinn Cook is trying to holler at a few girls out front. And I go in there, everybody's out of their rooms at 3:30, 4 o'clock. Everybody's out of there. They can't get anybody back in their rooms. So I'm trying to get I'm going floor by floor, getting everybody in the rooms. One African kid was calling Africa at 4 o'clock in the morning on his calling card. It was, I had to go row by row. They almost actually, they were on the row to row, and I'm finishing up getting everybody back in to keep them from being evicted. I'm going by this room. I think it was room 411 or something like that. And I'm hearing some weird sounds coming out of this room. So I get a little closer, and it was somebody having sex in the room, apparently sounded like. So I'm thinking somebody got a hold of one of these little prom dates, and it's going to work over there. So the next day, we're having camp announcements. And right before we break for the game, I got one last question, guys. I said, who was in I lost my hotel list with all the chaos. I said, who was staying in room 411 last night? I said, and nobody raised their hand.
Nobody was talking.
Nobody was talking, man. It was the player honor code. Nobody was talking right now. So anyway, for all we know, we might have had a baby born at Pangos that year. For all we know, right now.
Wow, that's great. So you never found out who it was?
I forgot. I didn't even bother to look at that point. I didn't. At that point, I didn't want to know.
Oh,
I was better off not knowing.
That's crazy. So we're gonna get to, this is one of the questions I love to ask before I get to the final question. If you could go back in a time machine to 2003, what would you tell a much younger Dinos Trigonis as he has just finished having LeBron James at his event and is now starting the Pangos All-American Camp?
That's a great question. That's a great question. It's just, I'm not sure what I'd tell him, to be honest with you. I think it's been a hell of a ride, and at some point I've gotten to understand and learn that it's not just the result at the end of the rainbow that's important. It's the journey on the way to the end there. And a lot of the memories are as important as the ultimate people that ended up going to high places. Memories are part of the important things that we experience. The experience, the journey is as important as the result or achievement as well. And just to kind of, you know, don't get stressed out about things you can't control. Maybe that's probably maybe the simple thing. Sometimes we get in a habit of trying to be perfect or trying to do things that if we don't do things correctly or initially fail, we get kind of maybe depressed or feel a sense of rejection. It's not about being stressed about it. It's knowing that, you know, the key thing is doing the best with what you have. If you're maximizing your potential as a person based upon what God has given you or what you have at the moment, you know, that to me is more of a relevant definition of success than having the same goal as somebody who may be more talented than you. If you're an aspiring player, and you know, if you're not as good as LeBron James or Kobe Bryant, doesn't mean you're a failure. If you maximized your talent as a player and got the most out of what you had, physically, skill wise, and maybe even a little bit more, that's gravy. You know, that's pretty good. You should feel happy about that, feel satisfied about that. So I think it's just a matter of understanding that the true measure of success is being the best you can be, you know, and leave other things that you can't control alone, that aren't worth you stressing about, because you're not going to make everybody happy. You're not going to meet everybody else's expectations. You need to focus on meeting your own based upon having both dreams and realistic goals at the same time. It's almost, you got to have a balance or an ability to understand. Nothing wrong with dreaming about something, but you also have to understand or come to grips of what's realistically possible too, both short term, long term, etc. So it's a little more complicated than that, but just enjoy the journey, smell the roses, be the best you can be with what you have, make the most of your life experience. You know, you never know when your number gets called. You want to not have any regrets at the end of the day when it's your time to go.
Amen. Final question: what's next in the future for Dinos, Trigonis, and the Pangos brand?
That's a good question. Number one is just trying to survive. You know, so it's almost like what the coaches say: survive in advance. Like you wanted to have a great game. Your game plan was to beat this team by 15 to cover the spread. You're in a dogfight now. You're lucky to win by 1 or 2. You just got to survive in advance. And sometimes when you have goals, you may not achieve that goal from what you're doing right now. You may have to salvage what you can of it, get out of it intact, and move on to try again, or move on to try something different that may work better, you know, with what you with your plans you have. So I think part of it is trying to navigate this COVID thing as best as possible. We're hopefully at the end of the tunnel here. Unfortunately, we're not getting a lot of cooperation from people, non-basketball people, who are so used to living a certain lifestyle that they can't put down right now. And they don't understand how it's jeopardizing the quickness of getting back to normal. Despite that, hopefully the vaccine, it sounds like it's moving at a good clip now. It seems like we have personnel in place that know what they're doing. And we're also have to understand that maybe initially we let the people that need it the most go first to get it, and then phase everything in. Because at the end of the day, even though ideally we want herd immunity, even more so, we want the people who are the most vulnerable to contracting it because of their age or their medical condition to have it first, because that's going to even reduce the rate even less than it already is, because it is maybe 3 or 4 times more deadlier than the flu, the normal flu. And from the overall realm of things, that percentage looks low, although the numbers look high. The raw numbers look high, but the percentages look low. So it's like a half glass full, half glass empty. Less than 1% of the public being affected looks like it's not a big deal, but 500,000 people dead is a big deal, because 500,000 of 350 million is less than 1%. So it's a way of looking at it. But we got to get to the end of this tunnel here and get these kids back out playing as safely as possible and get them back in school first safely as possible. Because like we talked about it earlier before we came on, the inequality in a lot of our elements of life is directly, in many cases, tied to the education level of the people involved. And in some of these school districts, from what I've heard and read and what's been reported, there's been people that are not showing up for class online.
Yeah.
Either because they have no interest, either because they're not forced to go to school to have an interest, maybe because they come from a family that doesn't have the technology, maybe they come from a family that whose 2 parents work double shifts and don't have the time to supervise their kids to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and a lot of other different factors. We got to get these kids back in school, number one, because the gap between the haves and have-nots that already exist is becoming deeper toward the Grand Canyon than ever before if we don't.
Well said. Dinos, thank you for coming on to share your testimony.
Yeah, I enjoyed shooting the breeze with you. I know you probably got a mouthful there. We've been on now for 2.5 hours. Hopefully, I'm not sure if anybody nowadays has the discipline to sit through that, but I'm glad we had a chance to talk, and it was fun.
Indeed. Well, everybody, this is episode 104 of Hoops Talk with Dave's Joint. Shout out to my man Dinos Trigonis for coming on to talk to us. For those that from Long Beach, California, for those that support Pangos and all of his other events, go check this out on YouTube, Facebook, and IGTV. Stay safe, stay blessed. Peace.